It is 14 minutes past 4, and we have Dr. Tas Walker on the line from Creation Ministries International, and it's so good to have you on the line. Dr. Tas, how are you this week?
I'm really good, Mick. It's really good to catch up with you at last, and I always enjoy the time here with you on the radio here.
Yes, well, it's awesome always to catch up with you, and of course we had a few technical issues last week, but things seem to be working just right this week, which is just plain awesome. And Dr. Tas,
awesome.
I believe you're a bit of an expert when it comes to things like coal.
I've had a bit to do with coal over the years. I used to work for the electricity industry in Queensland and was involved with coal supplies to the power stations. At that time, that was very important at that time for providing electricity, and I went down to coal mines and I went into open cuts and I checked the coal handling plants and the various ports and things. So I've seen a little bit to do with coal, and the coal is an amazing rock, and it's interesting to talk to geologists about it. They've got different ideas from most, and that's for a very special reason, actually.
I'm always sort of keen to find out how they date coal. I mean, some people say, oh, yeah, coal's this date, coal's that date. I mean, seriously, how do they get a date for coal?
Well, it's the way they do it is they explore the rocks, all around the country, and they, down near Lake Macquarie or down into Sydney and up in the Blue Mountains. They look at the rocks and they work out the order of them. It's fairly easy to do that. You see which ones are sitting on the others and that sort of thing. So they know the general order in which the rocks are found, and geologists have spent years working this out for Australia. And then, but of course, when you dig up a rock, it doesn't have a date on it. It doesn't have a little label and says, I'm 500 million years old. It doesn't say that at all. So what happens is the geologists took a long time to be able to figure out a date. They tried all sorts of methods to do it. And because they assume that the rocks were formed by the sort of things we see happening today, like rivers eroding the gullies and beach sand and that. And so they assume that things happen very slowly because nothing much geologically happens today, not on a big scale. And because of that, that's where they come up with the idea of millions and millions of years. And so they just simply put the dates on the different layers of rock. This one's 50 million years, and this one's 70 million years, and this one's 100 million years. And they do it in a logical fashion, but it's really just, how would you put it? It's just an arrangement to try to make it all make sense. And the thing that they avoid, the thing that they overlook is what the historical event that's recorded in the Bible of the global flood, the worldwide catastrophe, watery catastrophe that affected the whole of the earth. So they forget that, and that's why they think it's millions of years old. And so, as creationist geologists, we generally agree with the order that they have, but we don't agree with the dates because we don't agree with their assumptions. So It's very interesting, actually. Some coal is supposed to be, 50 million years old or 100 million years old. And that's what they, that's the date that they put on it because of the rocks that it's found in. And the interesting thing is that because of that, they would expect that there would be no carbon. You've heard of carbon dating, carbon-14 dating.
Yep. Carbon-14
is something that it decays away, and in 100,000 years, it would be all gone because it decays away fairly quickly. That's the way it works.
Yep.
And so they would expect no carbon-14 to be in the coal. And so they collected some coal to sort of calibrate the carbon-14 machines, and they found that it had carbon-14 in it.
Yeah.
And so that tosses the whole thing. And so coal, the coal, which shouldn't have any in it, always has some in it. Even diamonds. One of the guys, creationist geologist, collected some diamonds which weren't just 100 million years old, but 1,600 million years old, and they should have no carbon-14 in it. And he sent it off to the laboratory, and the laboratory came back and said, "This is how much carbon-14's in it." So it's really powerful evidence that they're not millions of years old. Yes. So that's where the dating comes from. The dating comes from where they find it on the map and where what rocks are over it and what rocks are under it. And from that, they work out the location, and then they look up the map or the chart, and it's got the date on there. So that's how they do it.
So it's a theory built on theory built on theory.
You could say that. Maybe add another theory in there. That's the way it goes.
Now, another question I have about coal. I saw this thing on YouTube the other day, and it was the side of a mountain. Some guy's sort of filming, I assume, on his mobile phone. The side of a mountain literally collapsed. It was a very sort of wet period, it looked like. There was a lot of rain and water about. But the whole side of this mountain collapsed, and you could see all the vegetation and everything just collapsing down this mountain. And it formed like a river of like vegetation that went down really close to their house. And I looked at that and I thought, wow, that's the sort of stuff that, would one day potentially possibly become coal. But then I thought about it.
Right.
I thought, well, yeah, that's the sort of stuff, all sort of mashing in together, and this was the side of a mountain. It turned into like a river. But then I thought, okay, hang on a sec. If I was going to mine that, if you consider the size of the mines we have these days, well, let's just talk about what I'm sitting on top of right now. We're sitting on top of the Sydney Coal Basin. Now, there would have to be 500 of these giant mountains, thousands of these giant mountains of stuff underneath us, and there's no mountain big enough for that much coal to be all in one place at one time. How can there possibly be that much vegetation and coal all in one basin?
That's right, because what it means is it was a very, very large catastrophe, very, very large. You saw a landslide. It was a very, very large movement of the earth, and so the Sydney Basin goes from Newcastle up on the north side of it. It goes all the way down past the Sydney Heads and that sort of thing, and then it goes to the other side, to the south, and there's Wollongong down there, and so. There's a lot of coal mines down there, and that's where there's a big coal exporting facility down there as well. So the coal is all the way under. It goes from all that distance, which is a couple of hundred, maybe more, kilometres. And so there's been this vegetation washed into place. And so that creates a problem for the geologists who don't believe in millions of years. They believe that it was slow processes, and they sort of think, well, how can we explain that? Just like you looking at that landslide, how can we explain that? And so they have a story about what they think it could have happened in the past. It's called a hypothesis, and they imagine it formed in a great big swamp. And so you'd be looking at a swamp from Newcastle all the way down, pretty well down to Wollongong, down that way. And so you'd be looking at a monstrous swamp. And I don't think we've got swamps that big in the world.
Yeah.
And so that's what they envisage. And but the problem is, when they think about it, how does the vegetation accumulate? How does it get there? And they think, well, it couldn't have been in a rainforest, because when trees die in the rainforest, they rot away and they don't accumulate. They need a way to accumulate them, and that's why they choose a swamp. So, and there's a lot of problems with that idea as well.
So coal can't happen in a rainforest. Dead trees won't just turn into coal one day.
No, the trees, they fall over. The leaves come off, the bark comes off, the branches come off, and they form a mulch on the bottom of the rainforest, but it won't form coal because it rots away as quickly as it accumulates. So that's the problem as to how to get it to accumulate.
Yep.
And so that's why they invent the idea that, well, it must have happened in a swamp. And so that's the way that the geologists who believe in millions of years, that's the way they explain it. But it doesn't. But there's a lot of problems with that.
Yeah, wow. There's a lot of very, 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 very big swamps, if that's the case. And as you said, you don't know of any swamp on Earth that size, and we're not the only coal basin on Earth.
No, that's right. But also, it's not just the size of it, because it has to accumulate. So you have the coal, the amount of coal and the vegetation and that's in the swamp has to gradually build up and build up and build up. And, of course, when it builds up, it dries out, and so it no longer builds up. So you've got to have the water level rising just very slowly, gradually over, hundreds and thousands of years, so that the vegetation builds up higher and higher. But it can't build up too quickly, or it will dry out, or it can't build up too slowly, or the swamp will get drowned. So it has to be exactly the right amount, and it has to build up for thousands and thousands of years. So it's really a big, quite an amazing story that we're told, and everybody believes it. That you read about it in the books, and you read it about it in the museum, and if you go to a coal mine, they'll tell you that. But that you don't really. Most people don't realise the big how unrealistic it is for that to happen.
Yeah, I know. When I saw this video the other day of the side of this hill sort of caving in, I sort of thought, okay, there's a lot of vegetation there, but that would be mined, in a few days. In considering the size of the machinery we use to mine coal these days. It would have to have been a mountain the size of, bigger than Mount Everest. It must have been like one absolute, and that's saying that the entire mountain was covered in trees and bush and everything else. And we know that Mount Everest doesn't grow that stuff up the top. It only grows down low. So you sort of think, okay, how could it possibly all just come into this one thing at the same time? Now, of course, it makes sense when you consider a big flood. But that's the only thing in my mind that actually makes any sense at all. Now, look, when we come back from this break, I think we'll talk about coal a little bit more. And thank you, Dr. Tas. It is 4:27. We're going to listen to Terry Ann right now with a song called Nobody. And we'll be back with Dr. Tas fairly soon after. We'll have a bit of a break. And if you do have any questions for Dr. Tas, please send them through to us. Just text 0401 949 949. That's 0401 949 949. It's 23 minutes to 5 and we have Dr. Tas Walker on the line. We've been talking to Dr. Tas this afternoon about coal, how coal has aged, how coal is created, and how possibly we get so much coal underneath us here on the Central Coast. I mean, from Newcastle all the way down to Wollongong, it's a big basin. That's a lot of coal. And Dr. Tas, I wanted to ask, coal, if coal was just sitting on top, for thousands of years, would it slowly deteriorate and not be coal anymore?
Well, it's like other rocks. It would sort of become like a blackish sort of a soil, so you do have that sort of thing that happens. And then as you go down into the ground a little bit, maybe a few meters, it starts to get more of a coaly shape. But the top part of the coal seams on various coal mines, it's what they call oxidized, so it's sort of deteriorated. And even though it's coal, it's not good quality coal, and so it's usually put to one side. They call it the oxidized coal, and it's treated like overburden, just put to one side. And then they get down a little bit, and it's fresher. It's got more heat value in it. And then under that, particularly up in the Bowen Basin, there's layers of coking coal, which is used. It's nice and structurally strongish coal, and they export it over to where particularly to Japan and places like that, where they use it for smelting iron. So the iron ore, and they produce iron in that way. So that's a very big export commodity for Australia. Is the coking coal. The steaming coal, they call it, is used in power stations in the area.
So coal is sort of made underground with a bit of heat, I guess. And when we see, these big catastrophic sort of mountain slides with all this vegetation, for it to actually become coal in the future, it would then require some pressure on top and heat, some more dirt on top, which could only come in a flood. Is that I'm assuming this, am I correct?
Yeah, that's right. So it would have to be buried, and it would have to sort of have some sort of heat into it, mainly heat. It's actually very interesting. People think it takes millions of years to form coal, but people have done experiments on it, and they find that, if you put coal, like wood, if you put wood in a sealed container, and you put some water with it and a bit of ash, like a bit of clay, so in it, and you seal it and you heat it up. If you heat it up to about the lowest temperature in an oven, 150 degrees centigrade or something like that, if you heat it up to that temperature, within a few weeks, if you open it up and have a look, it started to turn into brown coal.
Wow!
And so if you heat it up a higher temperature, the higher the temperature, it becomes from brown coal into black coal into anthracite, and so that's the way it happens under the ground. And it doesn't take millions of years; it takes weeks. That's all, weeks to do it. And so that's been a surprise to a lot of people. And as a matter of fact, during the war, people used to try to produce oil from coal and that sort of things to power their vehicles and their machinery during the war, and particularly in Europe they would do that.
Well, I know that where I lived in South Africa, when I was an exchange student, that was during the apartheid, they used to actually make oil from coal because there was all the sanctions on South Africa, so they were actually making oil from coal, and that's how we ran our tractors and cars.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's the way often that they explore for oil, is that they will do drilling, and if they encounter the coal in their drill core, they will test it and see if it's still got the oil in it. And if it's hasn't got any oil in it, it's been heated so that there's no oil left in it, they will then explore to see where it could have gone. And so they'll track it down where the oil is accumulated under the ground, and they'll drill down into that and be able to find the oil and to pull it out. So the oil it comes from coal. The same with the Bass Strait oil. That comes, the coal which is in Loy Yang area, that area, in that place, that goes under Bass Strait, and there's oil being generated from that vegetation, which is the brown coal that's under there, and it's producing the oil in Bass Strait, which is we've been using for decades now, and so that's where it comes from. Oil comes from vegetation which has been buried, and there's gas comes from the vegetation too, as it is. The reactions take place, it generates gas and it generates liquids, which is the oil, and so we've got lots of gas fields which collect the gas. It's called coal seam gas, and so it's clear that the gas is trapped in there, and if it had been just sort of sitting there for millions of years, and particularly near the surface, the gas would escape. And so it indicates that this vegetation was buried rapidly and quickly, and these chemical reactions happened once it was buried. So that's evidence of the size of the catastrophe of Noah's flood. And so that explains a lot of these things, which is really, really good. And there's a lot of good stuff comes out of understanding how it formed during the flood.
Yeah, wow. I mean, it blows my mind when we know how big the coal basin is that's underneath us. And actually what you were just saying makes a little bit of sense too, because we've had boats out off the coast here sort of sinking shafts looking for that coal seam gas and oil. Now we all know why, because we're sitting on the coal basin and they're looking for the gas and the oil around it.
And the coal is mined on the ground in the various mines through the Sydney Basin, that coal, those seams go under the ocean. They go under the ocean beyond the shore, and that's why they're drilling down there, because they know what's on the land, and they can extrapolate it to under the ocean to be able to find it there, which is amazing, isn't it?
Yeah,
and that's
absolutely
how it happens. Mm.
Yeah, and
so
you were saying before that up in Bowen, there's a different type of coal to what we have here. So does that mean this coal basin here, most of our coal is, similar from one end to the other end?
Generally, there's variations along a seam. It does vary, but when you get into the same seam, there tends to be nice and even going along that. And so that's what mines do, is they will mine a particular seam, and they will collect, mine the coal, and they have got a certain quality about it, and they can load that onto wherever they're exporting it to, and they know that the quality's there. So the people that are buying the coal, they want to make sure it's sort of got the amount of heat in it that they want, and so the people that are selling the coal, but that are mining it, they want to make sure they mine in the correct areas to be able to get coal that meets the specifications.
Yeah, wow. And with something as big as the Sydney Basin, you would assume that if it's a similar coal from one end to the other, it would have probably all been created around the same sort of time with the same sort of, it was created the same way, I guess.
Yeah. Well, the Sydney Basin, of course, it's not just all coal. It goes, I think it's about 5 kilometres deep in the Sydney area,
Wow.
Botany Bay and that area. So the basin goes down that far, and it's got layers of sandstone, layers of mudstone, but then it's got these coal seams which run along as well. So you've got a mixture of all these different sorts of materials which make up the Sydney Basin. And the Sydney Basin, basically, when you go to Echo Point and to look at the Three Sisters, those sediments are part of the Sydney Basin there. And so you could see it extends a long way inland, almost as far as Lithgow. And it's connected all the way up to the Bowen Basin, although there's other sediments sit on top of it in Queensland, and then it's expected that the Sydney Basin is connected to the Bowen Basin up in the North Queensland.
Wow!
So I always say that this was as the waters of Noah's flood were coming in this area. They were bringing sediment and vegetation in this area, and then there was an uplift. The crust of the earth moved, it uplifted, and as it uplifted, all the water which was on the continent then was sort of washed off from the Bowen Basin all the way down and into the Sydney area. And that's what deposited the Sydney Basin, and it washed out into the ocean through there.
Yep.
And so there was other things which happened as the flood continued, but eventually it reached the peak. The floodwaters reached the peak. The Bible tells us that the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, and then the waters started to recede. And it took a long time for the waters to recede. It took about 7 months for the waters to recede, and Noah sitting on the ark, wondering, when is it going to recede? When's the land going to be dry? And you know the story. He let out the raven, and then he let out a dove, and he let out the dove again, and then he let it out again. So he was testing. It was a scientific experiment, wasn't it?
Yes.
The testing when the water was going down, and it's all there recorded in the Bible, and it's an observation by Noah and his family and their sons and their wives. So there were 8 people witnessed this event. And the people that came off the ark, they knew what happened, and they told the story to their children, and their children told it to their children. And all around the world, you find different groups in New Zealand, in North America, in Europe, and all those sorts of places. There's people like the Australian Aborigines who've got stories. They've got what you call them flood legends, and so there's this memory of this real event in history, and so we see the effects of it in the coal deposits, in our country, and we see the effects of it in people's stories that they pass on, and which is fascinating. So there's a lot of evidence that gives you great confidence that what the Bible tells us makes sense of the world, and so it's really, really cool.
Absolutely. The whole flood story is not just a story, it's history. And it makes more sense than any other stories that we hear. Oh, wow. Dr. Tas Walker, thank you so much for this week. Another awesome week. And, hopefully we'll catch up with you again fairly soon. I think we've got a bit of a wait, don't we? I can see we've got you in August of this year.
Yeah, it's a while, isn't it? A while. But anyway, I always enjoy talking to you, Mick, and Radio Rhema CC at, 94.5.
94.9.
9, I got that wrong. And, so people can get information about coal and that at creation.com. Creation.com is an easy way to go.
All righty. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Tas Walker from Creation Ministries. Creation.com is the place to go. You are on 94.9